Hey folks, I'm Yannick Gwizdala. It's the Yannick Gwizdala podcast. We're going for a bit of a playing-centric episode this week. Why is that, might you ask? Well, because I need to play. I would really like to put out an episode of the podcast. So in order to maximize the time, I'm going to combine both of those things and just sort of let you into what's on my mind in terms of my approach, in terms of what I'm working on, and probably more specific, as the stuff I'm working on may not apply directly to you. More specifically, I want to talk about the concepts behind what I'm working on, how I'm doing it, what goes into building the practice routine, and how I'm working on really very specific ideas, incredibly repetitively, and at the same time, very consistently. I'm just kind of getting going here in the morning, feeling out the instrument, seeing where my chops are at, how I feel. Are there any obvious hitches? Or can I get straight into what it is, this sound that I've been working on for a few days? Maybe that sounds a little angular, a little more on the outside than the inside, but when you break it down, what I'm doing is playing a major 7 arpeggio of sorts. So a chromatic approach note to the root. Here we are in C. So B to C, E natural, B natural. That's just basically C major 7, but I'm coming down to the sharp 5, making it major 7 augmented. And then I'm playing that shape both in intervals of major thirds. So starting C, E, A flat, or G sharp, going up the octave. Let's play it down in 4-string range. So literally everyone out there who has a bass strung, regular tuning, 4 strings can play that. Once you have that basic shape, and I'm also playing it in minor thirds for kind of a pretty different flavor to my ears. And that's it. That's the variation. That's the idea. Those are the only 2 variations, whether I go up and down in major thirds or up and down in minor thirds. And that is what has populated my practice routine for the last few days. I'm going to put myself on the spot here and see if I have a voice note sort of highlighting this. Let's see. Nope, that's not it. What's this? Nope, that's another idea I'm working on. Okay, that's from a thing I was working on last week. So maybe I don't have this new one recorded yet. What's this? Oh, no, this is a composition idea. No, so normally, see, I've put myself on the spot and I haven't done what it is I'm about to suggest you do in this situation, which is record yourself all the time. Because what I like to do is remember what it is that I'm working on. It's so easy. I don't know if you've felt this or found this. I find it's really easy to let a couple of days roll by. And if you miss practicing or something, and then you're like, shit, what was I doing 2 days ago? It's really easy to record a little bit of each practice session to have a reference point of where you're at with that idea. And also to remind yourself simply what it was you were working on, so you can get right back to it, and you can have that kind of continuity, even if there was a little break for a day or so in your routine. You can have at least the continuity of the idea that travels through. So you know what? As we sit here and talk, or rather I talk and you listen, this is the nature of the podcast. I'm actually going to hit record on the phone. And do it in major thirds, different octave. So even just that is enough of a reference for me to be like, okay, on this day, what are we today? August 13th, 2024, that was what I was working on. If something happens tomorrow out of my control and I don't get back to the instrument, on the 15th of the month, I can be like, oh yeah, that's what I was practicing, and I can get right back to it. And again, maintain just a little bit of consistency, even if that isn't the day-to-day consistency that I think is so important. Like I said, specifically what I'm working on is this sort of angular shape moving in major and minor thirds, and that may not necessarily be something that makes you leap out of bed in the morning. Maybe that's not even what you want to hear right now. There are just so many other things you could slot into the harmonic, melodic, musical space, but leave all the other intent, all the other concepts that I'm talking about exactly the same. Something I like to do, something that's really in Ultimate Chop Builder, major modes, minor modes. There are 2 books that I wrote around this idea of staying kind of diatonic with an idea, even if that's just playing all of the arpeggios of a major scale. Can you do that diatonically? Let's go down the octave. Can you work that through a scale diatonically? Can you do that in all 12 keys? It's similarly, conceptually similar to what I'm working on in terms of the repetition and the ability to move things through key centers. And that's diatonically through a scale. What I'm doing with the shape is parallel. So it's kind of almost like the pedal board thing. If you think about signal chain, like series and parallel, is everything going in a line, or are things going alongside each other? And this parallel thing is moving an identical shape to different key centers. And then the series thing is moving it moving it up or down through a scale, through a single harmonic center. And one thing I'm noticing right as I do that right there, it's maybe a little easier to do it moving up the same string, where you start on the E string and you play C major 7, and then you go up the scale on the E string the whole way, playing these arpeggios until you kind of maybe run out of room a little bit, depending on how your bass is tuned. Actually, kind of an easy way to do it, because you're playing this scale on the E string. What I did as I was making the example of it first time around was actually play it almost all in the same position. So that means you get completely different shapes, you get different starting fingers. It's not all starting on the same string. It's just a little bit more of a challenge. So there was only one position shift. Granted, I have the 5 string with the high C, so I didn't have to make a position shift. If I were to do that in 4 string tuning, right up until here, there are no position shifts. I'm going to go. So very little position shifts rather than moving up that bottom string, that E string in sequence. So just a quick aside, that's something I noticed in the moment there. It's yet another way to challenge ourselves when we're playing things that are actually pretty simple and kind of, oh yeah, you might think like, oh yeah, major scale arpeggios, like I know this stuff, well, yeah, sure. I'm sure a lot of you do. I'm sure a lot of you are capable of playing that as we all are. But there's always a way to challenge yourself a little more. And when it comes to the shapes, I'm working on right now, for instance, I started out picking every note, for instance, so no legato at all. It's actually hard to do it that way now, but I went from picking every note to finding out where I wanted to hear the shape of the phrase more so than the dead on even accuracy of each note. And that ended up sounding, instead of picking kind of super even, now it sounds more like, and of course I'm kind of squeezing a little bit more out of that descending note. And then with the minor thirds, it's actually a little bit more challenging because the literal distance that the left hand, my fretting hand, has to travel to get from one shape to the next is a little bit, it's just 1 fret farther basically. So I had to really go in, like put it under the microscope in a big way, use a metronome, slow things down, give myself some discipline. Just give myself some discipline to get that initial foundation of technique, of phrasing, of, like I said, moving from everything strictly even and the same with picking every note with my picking hand to really finding the phrase. And then, of course, the next step is to actually use that in musical context. I personally don't think I'm ready with this phrase. I'm sort of coming to the end of a 1-week cycle. That's also, I should talk about that a little bit. That's kind of how I'm trying to do this right now. When I know I have the time to practice, I'm trying to put each new idea on a 1-week cycle. So I get 7 days of working on a shape or a phrase or whatever it is, just whatever the musical idea is. I give myself 7 days to work every day on that before switching to a new thing. And then I will cycle back, like that idea I've heard in the phone just now. It's another great example of why it's useful to record yourself all the time so you can go back and be re-inspired. And it's not necessarily just for the short term, but for the long term as well. Like that was a few weeks ago that I was working on these triad pairs. And that's really under my fingers. Like this is the sort of proof is in the pudding here, where I've started to work a little differently from what I've been doing in the past. I think in the past I was able to work on kind of more things. I mean, maybe this is total horseshit as well. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe this is just a far better way of doing it, and I've only just discovered that. So that's, of course, a possibility at the end of the day. Maybe I've just discovered the way I should have been doing it for all of these years, because it's definitely working better than anything has in the past. I was going to say I thought maybe my younger brain, my younger self, had more capacity to take on multiple ideas at the same time, to have a multi-pronged attack to learning information. But the reality is sort of telling me now that actually this is a far more efficient way to do it. And I'm feeling like the things I'm putting into my system, the way I'm reprogramming what it is I do, reprogramming or just programming from scratch for certain things, my playing, those things are staying in my subconscious and in my muscle memory far stronger than they ever have before, because of that initial intense and consistent, highly scrutinized approach to an idea in the beginning. Like, I know that I spent a week or 10 days on that idea, and I just don't feel that I ever put something in my playing as quickly as that ever before. And now it's been some weeks since I really looked at it or thought about it, and I heard it in the phone just now, and I'm like, oh, I can go straight back to that. It's immediately available. It's like a book in the library that you just pull off the shelf and open immediately. There's no searching down the aisles for it or looking it up on the computer. It's just right there. And then I think I had variations on that. Yeah. So there were a couple of variations I was working on. Again, just it's one basic idea. The premise being two triads, a tritone apart. Much like the augmented sound I'm working on right now, those two triads, I played them in groups of 3, and then I played them in groups of 4. And much like the augmented triads I'm working on right now, the variation is major thirds and minor thirds. And it's the same shape, so I don't feel like I'm overloading the system with something that's completely different. It is the same shape. It's just a very slight variation. And I think the fact that I'm keeping it in the ballpark and in the same area is really helping me with my process of assimilating that information, of more importantly, retaining that information. And perhaps there's an even more important layer after the retention of the information. It's the ability to let it happen, to let it just come out when the time is right without forcing it at all. You know, if I'm reading a book or really thinking about a new topic and then some weeks or months go by and then somebody brings up that topic in conversation, I want to be able to talk about that and discuss it and have like meaningful conversation about said topic. And I think this is what this approach is doing for me right now. So kind of exciting. Like you get this far down the road, 30 years of playing the instrument, and you experience a bunch of things and you play a bunch of different music and you get to certain levels and you hit milestones and you have goals and you move the goalposts further away and you work towards them. It gets harder and harder to find wins, to find firsts. And it's makes the whole process really exciting when you find things like this. And this is kind of a win and a first that will continue, well, at least I hope it will, seems to at least be continuing to grow and to continue, it continues to work for me. And I don't have to, I'm not reinventing the wheel here. I don't have to come up with some crazy new concepts, or, you know, I'm taking small pieces of information. As out as it might sound, a major 7, augmented major 7 triad or arpeggio is not anything new at all. And here I am taking some information that's hundreds of years old and working it into my playing here in 2024, and hopefully letting it come out as part of improvisation, as part of composition, as part of musical conversation with other people when I get a chance to be on the bandstand the next time. And there's the flip side to it is also like, God damn it, I sort of wish I'd been doing this for the last 30 years, if only I'd known, type of thing. But also everything I think is happens for a reason at the right time. So I think it's important just to be happy about that and to be glad it's here now and that it does seem to be working. The past couple of months I've been employing this idea. I think it speaks a lot to, and I've mentioned him before, I will mention him again many times, someone I've had the pleasure to play with once, or actually a couple of times, and someone whose teaching and whose philosophy I respect and appreciate, which is Kenny Werner, author of Effortless Mastery and fantastic piano player, teacher, you name it, bad dude. And someone who whenever he's being interviewed or he has something to say, I pay a lot of attention to. And his whole thing about letting the hands go where they go, I think is very important rather than trying to force it. And I heard an interview. That's interesting. I believe we lost the second camera. Oh dear. Oh well. It was nice having it for the first half of the podcast. Listen, I will get to that thought in just a second. If you're only listening, I very much appreciate the fact that you're listening, but if you're not, you can kind of get a bunch of close-ups and a little bit deeper inside this process if you head over to YouTube and check out the podcast there. If you are watching here on YouTube, also very much appreciate that. Leave me some comments about what you've heard so far, and how these kind of things affect your learning process and your practice routine. And also, have you had any breakthroughs recently? Like, I'm always so here to listen to people talk about like breakthroughs they've had and moments that have changed the way they think about things. I love hearing about that. That's why I was talking about Kenny Werner, and when he gives interviews, and he's not just like out there peddling the same basic speech every day. Like, yes, there's a basic premise of his philosophy, but it feels like he's constantly updating it and adding new things to it and discovering new things and sharing those. So I really appreciate people like that who share that information. And he happens to be someone I really look up to and admire, as a great hero of mine. And I continue to, although I've never officially studied with him, of course, I continue to do that through YouTube, through the internet, through his books. And the point I was about to get to before the second camera went out told me that it was too hot. Oh dear. It is kind of toasty here in Southern California. We're hitting the stride of summer, where it's gets into the 90s every day and hits up around 105, 110 a lot of the time, especially where we live. The point I was going to talk about a little bit was that I heard actually a couple of different people in interviews talking about how dialed in they know exactly where their hands are going. They know all the notes. They know. And I don't think knowing all the notes is a bad thing at all. I think if you're a great musician, you know all the notes. I think the step that I was a little that like pumped the brakes a little bit for me when I heard these couple of different people talking on interviews about how they know where everything is and what's coming. And man, if you know what's coming, stay home. It's so boring. And I'm speaking very specifically as, an improvising musician. Those were let me add the context here. Those were the contexts of the two interviews I was listening to. I was very interested in what these people had to say. One older musician, one younger musician. Is like, oh, what the hell's going on with the younger generation? I have no idea. So let's see what people are saying, where people are coming from. It was interesting to check out. But when I heard that, I was like, that's an issue for me. Like, if I knew what was coming, like what was going to happen ahead of time, I just wouldn't leave. I wouldn't leave the house. It'd be so boring. So when I hear people say, like, yeah, I know exactly the hands and the fingers and where they're going to go and where they are and all of that, I kind of, it's either that's a line for an interview or a podcast, so I'll call bullshit on it that way, or it's like an approach where literally everything they play is worked out. So I find it, I find it very hard to take someone seriously when they call themselves an improviser, if they then explain their approach like that. So I'm very much interested in the Kenny Werner thing, letting the hands go where they are. Now, how do you let the hands go, not where they are, how do you let the hands go where they want to go, and it not sound like just garbage? Well, of course, this process, putting all this vocabulary under our fingers. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself there, because that's the next idea. That's the other thing, is where you've got to have discipline, because I took like a sneak peek, like I looked around the corner and saw, there's this other line that I really want to work on. And I think it's good to, with the consistency thing, I'll spend most of my time on this idea right now. If I have an hour to practice every day, I'll spend a solid 50 minutes. But maybe the last 10 minutes of that practice session, I am taking a peek around the corner and seeing what's the next shape, what's the next sound, what's the next phrase. And it is this idea of... And when that's major thirds. And when you do it in minor thirds, you get a repeated note. So it's a totally different flavor, different sound. I won't go into it right now. We'll get into that on a later episode maybe. But the point being, the discipline to stick with the one idea is very important. Maybe there's a case to be made for like that, where I'm looking slightly ahead down the road. but it's that repetition, that putting this information into your fingers, into the muscle memory, into your vocabulary, into your understanding of music and melody and harmony and rhythm and time and sound, that allows the fingers to go where they want to go without you having to think about it, without you having to know about it, without you having to know what it's called. Yes, if you stopped someone in the middle of an improvisation and just said, stop right there, and they're on this note, yes, of course they can tell you that it's C sharp and the chord was, the chord was like, was E flat minor 6 or something, and they could tell you all of those things. But my God, they're not thinking about that. And I know I'm certainly not thinking about that in the moment. And when I hear people talk about the need for theory and this and that and the other, when it comes to improvisation specifically, kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit. And then you go listen to the person and you're, oh, well, yep, I can tell. One bar in and I can tell that you are thinking. I can hear you thinking. I can hear you thinking in your playing. And that is something that maybe you're sitting there thinking like, well, what the fuck do you mean you can hear them thinking? Okay, hear me out. Let's explain that a little bit. And maybe it's just something that, unless you get inside this process, unless you get inside the process of consistency and adding things so deeply into your subconscious that you don't have to think about them, maybe that's not a thing that you're going to understand just yet. It's definitely not a thing I understood for the longest time. I can't point to a moment where I was like, oh yes, now I have sufficient, I've checked these boxes enough, now I understand it. It's just something that slowly happened. You know, I've slowly crossed over to a lot of things not mattering and not caring about a lot of superficial things, musically speaking, and caring more about the programming of language and the design of my engine, basically, you know, building this motor that allows me to, you know, to communicate musically with the instrument. And those things are gradual. Like I said, I can't point to one moment and say, oh yeah, great, that was the light bulb moment where I could totally tell that this person, that person, the other person was phoning it in, or they were thinking too much, or that whole phrase of I can hear you thinking. But I really encourage you to try and get into that mode of putting things so deeply inside your playing that you truly forget about them until they come out naturally without you having to think about it. And it's a commitment. I know, like, less than 0.1 of a single % of musicians in the world actually get to that. That's why there's one Herbie Hancock and there was one Chick Corea and one Wayne Shorter and one Miles Davis. There weren't 1,000 people like that occupied that space. It's a very sort of, I'm not going to say lonely, but it's a very underpopulated area of art, like right at that very top. And that's something I can only aspire to. It's several lifetimes work, and I know I'll never quite get there the way I picture it or the way I hear it, which is actually a good thing, because it means I'll just keep working on it until the end. And but just tasting it, just trying it out and doing a little bit of that. If you take literally one phrase for the next week that's 4 notes, you know, why not take the one I'm working on, even if it's, you know, who knows, it might even fit into your playing somewhere. In fact, I think I have a practice loop in here. Yep. It's in C as well. Perfect. Okay. Yes, I'm kind of struggling there. That's something that I haven't been doing for a few days. Reminds me that I need to get back to that, put things in context. Unfortunately, the nature of having the camera on and knowing that I'm recording a podcast, knowing that I'm trying to make an example, puts way too many thoughts in my head. This is possibly the worst way to make an example of any of the things I'm talking about, because even when I'm trying not to force it, that already makes far too much of the process conscious. So it's actually kind of a crap way to do it, and I'm only shortchanging you by trying to. And unfortunately, what I was trying to do there was avoid exactly the things I'm working on right now, melodically speaking. So yeah, it's a little bit of a catch-22 situation there. Not the greatest way to do it, but hopefully you have some ideas, some concepts, maybe some fresh intent with which to approach your next practice session. Maybe that next practice session is right now. You can grab any number of these ideas, these melodic ideas or conceptual ideas from the podcast. Don't forget, if you want a bunch of stuff to practice, especially diatonic stuff, major and minor mode stuff, I have a bunch of these in stock, physical copies here at the studio, which I will sign and ship worldwide. I think we have some pentatonics in stock, some 251s and some altered. So they're all linked below at yannickwisdala.com. You can get physical copies at Amazon, digital copies at my website. They all come with play-alongs, with videos, all kinds of extras. And hopefully there's something in there for everyone, no matter what style of music you play. That's really what I'm trying to hit home here, is that it doesn't have to be about improvisation, it doesn't have to be about melodic playing, it doesn't have to be about a 5-string tune with a high C. Do this with Signed, Sealed, Delivered. Play Stevie Wonder's Signed, Sealed, Delivered over and over and over and over again. Just play the first 4 bars of it isolated, just on your own. Work on your time and your sound with that bass line alone. I'm literally talking, it can be any end of the musical spectrum, but conceptually you want to apply consistency, and you want to employ the fact that it's a very small amount of information that you work on quite intensively for maybe, like I said, 7 to 10 days. That's been, a great time frame that works for me. And the overarching sort of concept over it all is that you approach it with great time and with great sound. Time and sound over absolutely everything as far as I'm concerned. And that, yes, that can be with a metronome or without. If you want a little bit of discipline, especially in the beginning of working a new mechanical thing into your muscles, yeah, definitely. I highly recommend using the metronome. I've had some comments and questions like, hey, by the way, you're talking about this practice stuff. Why aren't you using a metronome? I had someone comment about Victor Wooten says you must always use a metronome. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I'm not about to debate Vic on the use of a metronome or not. I've been around him. I've taught at his camps. I've done metronome exercises with him in the room with a class full of people. He has some amazing teaching methods when it comes to the metronome, and I fully endorse, agree, support, love all of them. And then, of course, there are times where it's very much appropriate to not use a metronome, where you have to be able to rely on your own time. And with that comes, there are varying degrees of that, and of course there are varying degrees of using the metronome. There's the every metronome on every beat of the bar, or maybe every subdivision of the bar, right down to having I've done for years so many exercises with the metronome where it's like on beat 4 of the 3rd bar of the phrase at 60 BPM. I mean, this will tell you whether you've got time or not. If you can keep your time for 4 bars with the metronome only hitting once on beat 4 of bar 3 of your phrase. I mean, come on. So there's definitely a sliding scale of how much you can do with the metronome, and there's so many things you can do with it. And of course, there is very much an argument to say, hey, at some point, you can let go of it as well, and you can work on your own time, and with it, of course, your sound, and get great results from that. And if you're disciplined, and if you're focused, and if you approach it with the right intent. All right, that's it. That's a lot of talking, a lot of playing for a change on the podcast, which is, like I said at the beginning, essential for me right now, because I need to be back practicing, working towards a couple of new album projects for this year. Fingers crossed, I'll be going in the studio in December with some of the most ridiculous musicians on earth. So there's a big... I have pressure. I don't know pressure. Maybe pressure. Pressure is not maybe a bad thing in this sense. I like to give myself pressure, but there's definitely something there which is highly motivating to practice ever such a lot, to work on this new music and make it sound beautiful and be relaxed and enjoy the moment when the recording sessions come. And then a Live in London album that's being mixed from 2022. Is that right? 2022? Yeah, an album from 2022, a live album that's going to come out soon. So lots of new music on the horizon. Appreciate you guys and girls of the bass world spending some of your insanely precious time with me, talking about music, learning about the bass. And I will see you guys and girls on the next video.